You think reacting makes you powerful. It doesn't. The moment people realize they can control your emotions, your attention, your responses, you lose leverage. The most dangerous individuals in history were rarely the loudest in the room. They mastered something colder, something most people are too emotionally addicted to understand: the art of ignoring people. Welcome to Dark Mind Academy. Tonight, you're going to understand why silence terrifies people more than aggression ever could, and why becoming emotionally unavailable changes the entire power dynamic around you. Most people are slaves to reaction. Someone insults them, they respond instantly. Someone pulls away, they chase. Someone disrespects them, they beg to be understood. And without realizing it, they hand over power every single time. Because attention is currency. Emotional reaction is submission. The person who controls your emotions controls you. That's why strategic ignoring is one of the most ruthless psychological power moves ever created. Not because it's childish, not because it's manipulative, but because it exposes dependency. Humans are psychologically addicted to validation. We constantly seek signals that we matter: a reply, a reaction, an acknowledgement. And when that acknowledgement suddenly disappears, the brain begins to panic. This is why silence affects people so deeply. Not knowing where they stand with you creates psychological tension. The human mind hates uncertainty. It would rather receive painful truth than silence. Silence forces people to confront themselves, and most people are not mentally prepared for that. Notice how emotionally weak individuals always need to explain themselves. They overtext, overreact, overdefend, overcommunicate, because they fear losing connection. But powerful people understand something darker. The less desperate you appear for attention, the more psychologically significant you become. Scarcity creates value. That applies to money, to status, to time, and especially to attention. When you become constantly available, people unconsciously stop respecting your presence. Your energy becomes predictable, common, cheap. But when your attention becomes limited, controlled, selective, people begin studying you differently. This is why emotionally detached people often appear more intimidating. Not because they're physically stronger, but because they appear internally stable. And stability creates psychological dominance. Think about it carefully. Who looks more powerful? The person screaming to prove themselves? Or the person who remains calm while everyone else loses control? Stillness is threatening, because calmness under pressure signals emotional self-control. And emotional self-control is one of the highest forms of power a human being can possess. That's why some people become uncomfortable when they can't read you. Your silence removes predictability, and unpredictability creates tension. Most people reveal too much. Their emotions leak through their words, their reactions, their expressions, their desperation. But when someone cannot emotionally access you easily, they begin projecting their own fears onto your silence. That's where the real psychological shift begins. Silence creates imagination, and imagination is often more powerful than reality itself. This is why strategic withdrawal changes social dynamics instantly. The moment you stop over-explaining yourself, people begin trying to explain you. The moment you stop chasing, people begin wondering why. The moment you emotionally detach from constant validation, you become difficult to manipulate, because manipulators survive on emotional access. They provoke reactions. They feed on emotional instability. They test your need for approval. But when you stop reacting the way they expect, their control starts collapsing. That's why ignoring someone can feel so psychologically brutal. It removes certainty. It removes reassurance. It removes emotional control. Now understand this carefully. There's a difference between emotional discipline and emotional immaturity. Weak people ignore others to avoid accountability. Powerful people ignore strategically to protect peace, energy, and leverage. One is avoidance, the other is control. And most people never learn the difference. They think being emotionally reactive means being authentic. But uncontrolled emotion is not authenticity. It's exposure. Every unnecessary reaction reveals what controls you. The person who angers you controls your emotions. The person who easily gains your attention controls your focus. The person who can emotionally destabilize you controls your state of mind. That's why mastering detachment changes everything. Detachment is not about becoming emotionless. It's about refusing to let emotions dictate your behavior. Cold people are not always heartless. Sometimes they simply learned what emotional chaos costs. They learned that over-explaining weakens mystery. Over-chasing destroys value. Overreacting exposes insecurity. And once someone understands this, their behavior changes permanently. You start speaking less, observing more, responding slower, moving quieter, not because you're trying to appear powerful, but because you stop feeling the need to constantly prove yourself. That's the difference between fake confidence and real power. Fake confidence demands attention. Real power controls attention. Look at history carefully. The most psychologically dominant figures were often measured with their words. Calm under pressure, difficult to emotionally provoke, strategic with attention, because emotional restraint creates presence. People remember those who remain composed while others collapse emotionally. And this becomes even more dangerous in modern society, because most people have lost the ability to tolerate silence. Everything today is instant stimulation.
Instant repli, instant validation, instant émotionnel réaction.
People panic when conversations slow down. They panic when someone pulls away emotionally. They panic when attention disappears. Why? Because silence forces self-reflection. And many people use constant noise to escape themselves. That's why disappearing strategically changes how people perceive you. When you stop constantly inserting yourself into every situation, your presence becomes more valuable. People begin wondering where you are, what you're doing, why you've changed. Absence creates psychological weight. But here's the part most people misunderstand. Ignoring people is not about revenge. The moment your silence becomes emotional revenge, you lose control again. True strategic silence comes from emotional independence. You are no longer reacting to gain a response. You are simply no longer emotionally available for unnecessary chaos. That energy shift changes everything. Because emotionally independent people are difficult to manipulate. You cannot guilt them easily. You cannot pressure them easily. You cannot emotionally bait them easily. And this frustrates emotionally controlling individuals, especially narcissistic personalities. Narcissists rely heavily on emotional reactions. Attention feeds their sense of control. Even negative reactions still validate their influence over you. But when you emotionally detach, when you stop feeding emotional energy into their games, they often become increasingly unstable. Because your silence disrupts their psychological control system. That's why some people become obsessed the moment you stop caring. Your emotional withdrawal forces them to confront something terrifying. They are no longer controlling your emotional state. And for psychologically controlling people, that feels like losing power entirely. Now, this does not mean you should become cruel or emotionally unavailable to everyone. That's another mistake people make after discovering psychological power. They become performatively cold, artificially distant, emotionally robotic. But true emotional control is balanced. You remain respectful. You remain calm. You remain emotionally intelligent. You simply stop giving unlimited emotional access to everyone, because access is earned. And this mindset alone changes your entire social reality. People begin respecting your boundaries more. Your words carry more weight. Your reactions become more meaningful because they're rare. Remember this carefully. Constant reaction lowers value. Controlled response increases value. This is why silence after disrespect feels more powerful than arguments sometimes. Arguments often give people emotional satisfaction. They confirm emotional access. But calm detachment, that creates uncertainty. And uncertainty lingers in the human mind far longer than anger. Think about the people you can't stop thinking about. Usually, they are the ones who remained emotionally difficult to fully understand. Mystery creates obsession. Humans become psychologically attached to unfinished emotional experiences, to unanswered questions, to unresolved tension. That's why silence can dominate someone's thoughts more than words ever could. Now imagine combining silence with observation. This is where true social awareness develops. When you stop talking constantly, you start noticing everything. People reveal themselves through patterns, through inconsistencies, through emotional impulses. Most manipulation becomes obvious once you stop reacting emotionally in real time. You notice guilt tactics, tension games, fake concern, hidden insecurity, subtle disrespect. Silence sharpens perception, because reaction distracts observation. And once someone develops this level of emotional control, social dynamics become easier to understand. You stop taking everything personally. You stop chasing closure from people incapable of honesty. You stop trying to force understanding from emotionally immature individuals. Instead, you conserve energy. And energy conservation is another hidden form of power most people ignore. Emotionally reactive people burn themselves constantly, overthinking, over-explaining, over-fighting unnecessary battles. Meanwhile, emotionally disciplined individuals move differently. They choose where energy goes, who receives attention, what deserves reaction. That selectiveness creates psychological strength. Because not every battle deserves your emotional investment. Sometimes the strongest move is complete disengagement. Not because you're weak, but because you understand value. Lions do not react to every barking dog. And emotionally disciplined people do not react to every provocation. This mindset becomes extremely important once you realize something uncomfortable. Many people secretly test your boundaries, not consciously all the time, but psychologically. They test how easily they can access your emotions, how quickly you react, how desperate you are for approval. And your reactions teach people how to treat you. If disrespect always receives emotional overreaction, people learn they can emotionally control you. But calm detachment changes the dynamic immediately. It signals self-respect, internal control, emotional stability, and stability is rare, especially today. Now here's the darkest truth most people avoid hearing. The ability to walk away calmly is one of the highest forms of social power. Because most people stay attached to situations that destroy them emotionally. They stay where they're disrespected, ignored, manipulated, devalued, not because they enjoy pain, but because they fear emotional separation. They fear losing connection more than losing peace. And that fear makes them controllable. The moment you stop fearing emotional loss, your entire presence changes. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop begging for understanding. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain unstable connections. That's when silence stops being a tactic and becomes part of your nature. You no longer feel obligated to react to everything. You become harder to provoke, harder to manipulate, harder to emotionally destabilize. And ironically, that's when people begin respecting you more. Not because you demanded it, but because emotional discipline naturally commands respect. Most people spend their lives trying to control others. Powerful people learn to control themselves first. That's the real secret behind silence. It was never about hurting people. It was never about playing games. It was about mastering your own emotional dependency. Because once someone controls their need for validation, their need to be understood, their need to constantly react, they become psychologically free. And psychologically free people are dangerous because they cannot easily be manipulated by approval, fear, guilt, or emotional pressure. That kind of inner control changes the way the world responds to you. People feel it before you even speak. The calmness, the restraint, the emotional distance, the selective attention creates presence without force. And in a world addicted to noise, the quiet person who controls themselves completely will always appear powerful. Welcome to Dark Mind Academy. Master your mind, or someone else will. If this video opened your eyes, subscribe to Dark Mind Academy for more dark psychology and human behavior breakdowns. And comment this below. Silence reveals power, because the people who understand that sentence see the world very differently.